Hey everyone, my name is Kajal and today we are in conversation with Alina Joseph. She's a machine learning engineer at Rabot, a robotics startup. In this conversation, we talk about her college experience in the US and how it differs from the Indian education system. Then we talk about her journey from a QA engineer to an ML engineer. And lastly, she talks about how she's giving back to the community by teaching non developers how to code in Python. I've included all of the timings in the description below. And if you're someone who enjoys interesting conversation that inspires you to pursue your dream, make sure to subscribe to this channel. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's get started. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me here. My name is Alina Joseph. I was brought up in Kuwait in the Middle East. My parents are originally from India. They come from the state called Kerala and then moved here to America to pursue higher education and have been here since. I first started off doing electrical engineering in undergrad. Eventually, I moved to Philly for work and have been working since.
Nice. So, what was your undergrad experience like, especially coming from Kuwait, where probably the educational system may not be the same?
It was definitely very different in the Indian school system. There's this like methodology where the teacher teaches you a subject and then you go through the process of answering questions based on what you've been taught. There was a shift in how education was taught over here. It's more of they give you a project and they expect you to figure out and learn things yourself, which was a big shift for me initially. I'd be in my undergrad classes thinking, wait, we didn't really learn about this specific topic or subject, and being like, oh, wait, I think what I'm supposed to do is figure it out. It was really nice to have practical experience of kind of piecing things together. So even though it was a shift, it was definitely one that helped you navigate challenges and problems in a way that's helpful, especially when you're out working in the field. You're going to have problems that maybe people around you are not familiar with. So it's like really good to have those skills of just navigating problems that no one can just quickly give you an answer, but rather you figure out.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. Even for me, that shift came, and as you mentioned, it's good because now you learn how to solve problems. There's no, here's what you've studied, and here are the questions, answer them. It's
Yeah.
here's a problem, learn to solve it.
Yeah, learn to solve it, learn to think about the problem a certain way, structure your problem, break it into chunks. You may not be able to solve the entire problem in the first go. Break it into chunks and then just focus on one area and try to see if you can first solve that.
Now let's talk about your first job. You said you moved to Philly for your job.
Yeah, I worked at Comcast through a contracting company. It was a job for QA test engineer. What we did was all the new products that Comcast was putting out had to be vetted through a really good streamlined QA process. When I started my job, I started as a tester, someone who'd be running manual tests. We had list of test cases. It was fairly straightforward and you just had to follow it. You go from that to kind of learning, or how do you write a test case? What are the different architectures that influence a test case? How do you understand quality of a product and break it down into chunks that other people can follow? So after 8 years at Comcast, I've had significant growth in terms of I went from a manual testing person to running automation tests to leading automation execution teams to then eventually writing my own automation. So there's been a lot of learnings in that process. Even though I walked in with lesser skills, I know for a fact that when I left Comcast, I had, bagged a bunch of new skills, and it was really exciting for me to kind of step out and look at what other opportunities were available.
Wow, that's a huge experience. So after this first job, you moved on to your current job, or there was an in-between job?
I moved on to this current job.
What's the name of your company?
The company is called Rabot.
So what's your current job about?
I've joined a startup company and I specifically work on building machine learning models. I must add that 2 years ago, I was just starting by looking at some Python tutorials and just figuring out, oh, how can I code in Python? I was drawn to work specifically with datas, and the field of AI and machine learning had so much scope. So I started looking into it. And even though it was like super overwhelming in the beginning, I was very consistent with just keeping at it. And so the job that I do right now is a machine learning engineer. So I basically build models and figure out how to work with cameras and eventually build good computer vision models. So again, it's fairly new for me, especially in the past year. Since joining the company, I've had significant growth in terms of just being exposed to the world of AI and machine learning. Our team, like, we specifically work on robots. So having that computer vision piece is really critical. And that's the part that I'm focusing on right now. And of course, just with any startup, you don't just stick to a specific role. Sometimes you have to wear different hats. We're in this space where we keep having to shift all the different kind of roles that we have to do, but it's definitely has been a very wonderful experience working with startup team. Very different from corporate America and corporate setting.
Yeah. All right. Now let's switch gear and talk about your group where you help non-developers with Python and get on with writing their own code.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have this friend, Srutika. She's a med student, and she's a fantastic artist. Every now and then she comes up to me and, hey, Alina, can you code this? Like, can you make this for me? I think that would be a really cool thing to have. So after like 2, 3 requests from her, I decided, you know what, let me just teach you how to do it, because it's simple, but it's not as simple for non-programmers. If you go onto the internet, there's a lot of material out there. You'll need some guidance. You'll figure out the lay of the land, but it is still a jump. So I decided to put these classes together specifically for her. And I asked some of my other friends, hey, I'm doing this for Sritik. Would you be interested? So I started the classes with just 2 kids initially. That class grew to 4. Now I have a second batch. I have a total of 8 kids. That's just the journey of how I went from helping my one friend out to now like having a bunch of students. And it's been quite the journey with them. It's quite an experience teaching non-programmers how to code, because there's a lot about how you think about structuring code that you have to convey to them, and they'll have their own ways of solving the same problem. And that's the beauty of programming, right? Like, there's no one right way to do it. There's like so many different ways to do it, and you got to make people comfortable with that notion that, hey, you can solve this problem in as many ways as you want. You'll have to figure out what works for you. And it's like a learning experience for me too, because it's very interesting how your influence of how you think about the problem can shape the solution that you come up with. So
Can you
it's
give
really,
an example?
yeah, absolutely. Within my first 2, 3 classes, I taught my students how to play around with Selenium library. So using Selenium library in Python, you're able to kind of automate any activity you do on your browser. So one of the students, she was very interested in writing a program that could take in your birth details, like the day you were born, the time of your birth, and then find out the corresponding sign, all the astrology stuff. For a programmer, you know that you could probably simply write a simple API to go and get something like this, right? If you look at it from a perspective of someone who's no exposure to APIs, you can see them struggle and kind of like figure out how to solve that problem. But now you throw an option of, hey, there is this library, it's called requests. You can do API calls. How would you write your program based on this? And you teach them how to use that library. So the answer that they have, the first time around, they use Selenium to go solve that problem. Not the best approach, obviously. Now they're using request and calling APIs to solve that exact same problem. I mean, a lot of what I have learned is really Googling and figuring it out from Stack Overflow and
Yes.
putting it all together, right?
You are bread and butter for every programmer.
Yeah, so I'm teaching my students to do the same. Like, I watch them struggle and it's like, okay, that's fine. You can struggle, that's okay. But Google, find out if someone else has solved this problem. The beauty of our software community is a lot of things are open source, a lot of things are answered online. For someone who is not a programmer, is just getting started, those answers are pretty much available. They just need little guidance of, hey, where to look, how to think about this problem, then how can I solve it based on all the information I've been given.
I'm really glad you're doing this. Let's say someone is starting to learn to code. What are
Hmm.
some of the things that they can do to navigate all this information that exists out in the world? What advice would you give to them?
The advice I would give to them is really consistency. Like when you're starting off something, you can have a lot of energy and then go in at it. Maybe for 2 weeks, you spend 3 hours or an hour every day trying to work on it. But then once you lose your momentum, you kind of forget everything that you've learned. And then 2, 3 months after that, you've just given up, right? So I think like the key really is consistency. If you can spend maybe an hour a day or break it into chunks where you can do it regularly. Try to put your plan together where you're setting yourself up so that you don't fail.
It's really good advice. Have an action plan and be consistent so you make sure that you're following through. And it is common that you will fail or you will get stuck. Just reach out for help. Have that support system that will help
Yeah,
you.
yeah, absolutely. And surround yourself with people who can encourage you. I think that's been something that's been really helpful for me is, having my partner or my friends who are super supportive and they're like, come on, Alina, you can do it. Like, keep at it. You'll solve this. That's fine.
Yeah, that is great advice. Thank you so much for doing this. If you all enjoyed this video, give it a like and go check out Alina. She's doing amazing work. I'll try to add her LinkedIn profile so you can follow her and check her stuff out. And don't forget to subscribe.